All right, so we are joined from Dallas by my friend, LSU alumni, Xavier University alumni, Dr. Ashley Larche-Willis. Just so glad to have you with us today. We are in the Human Services Career Cluster. We've got a room full here with us at Velma Jackson High School. We are recording this for our friends at Rosa Scott, Madison Central, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, the Academic Options Center, and our YouTube channel. And we thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
Yeah, so happy to talk to the class. So I'm Ashley Larche-Willis. I am an LPC, which stands for Licensed Professional Counselor. You're fast forwarding my doctor, Greg. You got to let me finish my dissertation.
Oh,
Yeah, working on it. So I'm in a doctoral program in counseling at the University of Holy Cross in New Orleans. And yes, definitely met Greg at LSU. So at LSU, I got a bachelor's in psychology. And then I got a master's in counseling at Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. And now I'm in a doctoral program in counseling. So I work right now at a telehealth company. We provide mental health services for folks online in 17 states. And one of the primary things I do right now is interview and hire counselors from all over the country to work with people. So happy to talk to y'all just about anything about my personal journey toward becoming a counselor, just the different routes you can take to work in mental health and answer any questions that anybody has.
yeah. So we're obviously going to get into that, but let's start at LSU. We have here in Mississippi, we have a lot of kids tell me, they see LSU on TV and they just think it's all fun and games, and I want to go to LSU too. But it is a very, very rigorous academic institution, and it's a lot of people. It is very easy to get lost in the shuffle. I went to Madison Central, which is one of the schools that I watched this later, and we had almost 500 in my graduating class. But even then, you can get lost in the shuffle in a place like LSU. So you went to LSU, very large PWI, and then went to a smaller Catholic HBCU in New Orleans, another great institution, Xavier, right there off I-10 in New Orleans. So tell us about those two experiences, because obviously going to a PWI and then an HBCU they have both have great pros, but talk about some of the things you got out of both institutions.
Yeah, that's a really good question. They were both very valuable experiences in different ways. One thing I can share too is that the first place I went for college, my first semester freshman year, was Baylor University.
I did not know that.
Yeah, which was a far travel from Slidell, Louisiana. But in high school, when you get to your senior year, colleges might start sending things, in the mail. You start seeing things, and so I had gone there on a college tour. Loved the campus and thought I'd try it. And I was a little afraid because it was far from home, but I got there and I just realized that the campus culture just wasn't really feeding me. And I didn't really feel that sort of at-home experience. And so I decided to transfer to LSU right away. So I only spent one semester there. And Baylor is a private Baptist university, so also a PWI, but private. So that was a different experience too than LSU. But got to LSU, fell in love. And I think the great thing about LSU is you mentioned the thing that some people know about it, like, there's social events, there's sports, and there's also the academic rigor. And so I think it's such a great place because you get both. And what is really good, I think, about LSU, even though it's a PWI, it's such a large campus. There's so much diversity on the campus, like international diversity, right? Like all different races, ethnicities, cultures, sexual orientations, genders. I mean, people just from all sort of different places. So you have the opportunity to connect with anybody that you feel most aligned with. And so I think that was really great there. And so at LSU, there's a really strong It was called at the time Office of Multicultural Affairs. And so it was programming, and there were support staff just to make sure that there were resources and programs specifically for students who identified as just coming from diverse populations, but particularly for me, a Black student. So I found a home, in that place in programming. Also, they have available sororities and fraternities to join of all different backgrounds. I chose to do that. Alpha Kappa Alpha. I love that experience. So I think it was really great. It is large, so there, you do have to be disciplined there, know what you're there for, keep a calendar, make sure you're where you need to be. There's not anybody really looking for you, all the time. So fast forward the experience at Xavier. So it's a much smaller institution. Like you said, it's an HBCU, also Catholic. And so
Catholic HBCU in the United States.
That's right. That's right. And it's also what's different than LSU is like the environment, so Xavier is like sort of in a more urban environment, near downtown New Orleans. So the campus feels a little different. It's not as large. So for a student who likes a smaller setting, that may be good. I noticed there was a real sense of community there, where people were looking for you to show up at class. If you weren't there, somebody's going to ask you where you were. And so I really valued that experience as well, just in a different way. So two really good experiences. And now in this doctoral program at the University of Holy Cross, which is also a Catholic university, private in New Orleans, I have the opportunity to do some classes online. We use Zoom, we use, just interacting in other ways other than being in person in class. And that fits within my lifestyle because I have to work full time. So that is what that looks like. And so that feels different too, being in a program that's primarily delivered online. You don't have that campus experience. So I am glad that I had the in-person campus experience for undergrad and even my master's. That was all in person on campus. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's great, because even if kids aren't interested in this career field, it's important to know what all these institutions can offer. And it's not just the parties and the fun and the games. There is a very strict academic expectation at LSU and also at Xavier. And you got to look at what fits you best. You don't need to go. Your parents tell you to go there. You don't need to go there because you think it's fun. You got to go a place that's going to advance your career. Obviously we got to talk about the career of LPC, because I hear kids say they want to major in psychology just because they think it's just reading minds and all the stuff you see on TV. And that is far from the truth. So talk a little bit about what somebody might learn in a psychology program and kind of the career of an LPC, because it's I don't think it's what a lot of people realize.
Yeah, good question. I will say when I first chose this career path, it was in high school. I remember having, as a senior, a psychology course in high school. And the psychology teacher was he just talked about the material in a really fascinating way. And I always, just at a very basic level, was interested in understanding why people do the things that they do, right? Just that simply. And so I looked at, the different career options. I was in what was called at my high school in South Ohio was an allied health track, which might be similar maybe to what some people want to do in this course. So that's all I knew. And also I will say, when I first went to college, I double majored in psychology and journalism because I couldn't pick. And that was okay. College is a place where, you don't always have to be 100% sure right away. You can just get there, start something, get the introductory classes under your belt, and get mentorship, talk to people about different career paths and programs and figure it out. So initially, I thought that the only way to become a therapist was to go to school for psychology, then get a PhD in psychology and become a clinical psychologist. It is one track, but it's not the only track. And so it actually wasn't until I had graduated with my bachelor's in psychology and started working. I worked for the health department with people living with HIV/AIDS.
Wow.
I did that for 10 years. And midway in there, I decided to go back to school for my master's in counseling because I learned that I could become a therapist with a master's degree. And before, I thought that I had to get a PhD first to become a therapist. So an LPC, or a licensed professional counselor, is someone who has gotten a master's degree in counseling. And then there is an examination, a national examination that you take. And then you go through 3,000 hours, supervised hours of clinical work under a clinical supervisor. And then you are fully independently licensed as an LPC. Another track that some people take is social work. So some people will get a master's in social work, and then they can become a licensed social worker, and then they have a path of getting supervised clinical hours and additional training in the clinical work, and they become LCSWs.
Yeah, you mentioned the Masters of Social Work here at Jackson State. Here in Jackson, they have a 1-year MSW program that is very popular.
Oh, it's accelerated, yeah. And so I believe after that master's, you become an LMSW. There's some extra steps to become the clinical, like licensed clinical social worker, but it is another route that you can take. So I just recommend, if anybody wants to work in the field of mental health, that you look into all the different sorts of jobs. We're all interested in how much money different jobs make. I say look into it. It's important. What kind of lifestyle do you want to have? So I'd say that's also something to consider.
Yeah. Now, and it's important to understand that there's a huge need for this now, because in the last few years, there's been a lot of things in the media. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of change in society. As we know, especially in rural communities, in minority communities, there was a stigma for mental health issues. And I think it's important for everybody to understand, no matter, and we'll have some members of the Latinx and Asian community that see this later, and obviously, some white students that see this later. But I think it's important to understand, no matter what color you are, no matter what gender you are, mental health issues does not mean you're crazy. It does not mean you are sick. It does not mean you're deranged. And I think it's becoming more and more important for people to understand that something that happens to you at some point in your life could trigger certain behaviors. I'm not even a mental health expert, and I understand that at least this much is that your environment can cause things. That doesn't mean you're a crazy person. And having some sort of even a temporary mental illness can really be detrimental if you don't understand the type of treatment that is available and the type of help that is available, and then understanding that it is a more diverse field now because of the growth of female and minority therapists.
Absolutely. You brought up so many important points. One thing that you talked about in the beginning is just stigma around mental health issues, and in counseling, we talk about wellness on a continuum, right? And so it's not just, are you mentally healthy or are you not? We sort of look at things like, there's a spectrum, at any given point in our lives, depending on what is going on with us, we might be, on the far left, maybe having a really difficult time, or to the far right, like we're as happy as we can be. And stressors that come up in life, many times that are outside of our control, right? Transitions, adjusting to different situations as we age and get to different stages in life. Just even those transitions can lead to stress. Working, things going on with the people who we live with, parents or family members, guardians, whoever. There's all these different dynamics. And so it's such an individualized thing. We all react differently to different situations. So it's a very personal thing, which is why I always recommend people have a relationship with a professional counselor or therapist to just talk through the things. I would say many of the people I work with in private practice might not be what you might consider, what people say is having a mental illness. They're just navigating some transition in their life, and they just might not feel as mentally well or at peace as they normally do. They notice something is just off with themselves. And sometimes we just need extra support. I will say, as we go through things in life, sometimes we talk to our friends, we talk to our parents or grandparents, and they just might be coming from a place and giving us advice based on their personal experience and what they know. And that's a bit different than confiding in someone who has a background and understands how the mind works, how people work. And counselors will generally not tell you what to do. They will not give you advice and say you should choose A and not B. They're really just walking with you to help you make your own decisions that are best for your life and navigate the challenges and learn skills to deal with the things that come along with being human, right? Just very simply identifying our feelings. When stuff happens, you feel things, it's human. Somebody upsets you at school or work, you might get mad, naming that and talking about and figuring out, okay, what are the things that I can do to work through this feeling that's temporary to get me to the other side. So that's a big piece of it. Also, you mentioned stigma, and maybe even particularly in the Black community. I think, now we're seeing the walls break down with that, as more people, we have access to social media, we have, we're seeing more people embrace mental health, embrace therapy. Some people in the older generations did not have the opportunity to see that, and it didn't always look the same. And so also, if people are members of communities of faith, depending on what you might have been taught at church. And I grew up in church, but I grew up in a church that also believes that mental health is a part of health. But everybody doesn't necessarily grow up in churches that send that message. Yeah. And so you just have to understand that there are different opinions, but mental health and having mental health issues is just human. And it's not specific to any race or background. It does not discriminate. Stress in life, it happens to all of us. And so we really, as a Black community or any, minority community, we can do ourselves a disservice by not having access or allowing ourselves to access resources to just make life a little easier. Navigating, challenges of stress and things like that. So,
yeah, and it's also important to understand a lot of employers now will provide free mental health services as part of a benefit package. And even when we were at LSU, they had a great student health center that had free mental health counseling from graduate students that were working on their hours for licensing. So there are free resources, because you hear a lot of people say, well, I can't afford therapy. Maybe you can't afford the top dollar therapist, but there are, especially if you work in the state, we have a big Nissan plant here a lot of people want to work at. They have benefits as far as mental health. So there are free resources of several types within the mental health community that is there to support people in mental health struggles. Because like we said, I don't, it doesn't matter what color you are or anything, is the ultimate equalizer. And it is going to apply to you at some point in your life. And, I think it's important for kids to understand now that it's completely normal.
That's right.
There's nothing about it that makes you weird. There's nothing about it that makes you crazy. And it doesn't mean you need to go. It doesn't mean you need to be committed to an asylum. But, we were at LSU during Hurricane Katrina.
That's right.
And in the middle of that, I had pneumonia in the middle of all that. So the mental stress that I was going through at that time, having to be a grad student, dealing with unanswered questions about my family in Jackson, and then having to deal with my own stuff, that was a huge mental stress for me. And you were there with me. It was a crazy time for all of us. So things like that happen. It doesn't mean that I made a bad decision. It just means that something happened in my life to cause stressors. So
that's right.
I think that's important for everybody to understand.
Yeah, and it's not just something that we wait on until there's a major problem. We can sort of preventatively help ourselves to maintain good mental health. Just monitoring, if you access social media, monitoring the things that you're seeing, just understanding that the things that you read and the videos you watch, affect how you feel, just pay attention to it. If there are pages that you follow, maybe on Instagram or Facebook, and every time you see the stuff is triggering, it makes you sort of feel worse, unfollow it. It's a simple thing to do. Also follow maybe some new pages with inspirational things. I'll say a few things that I love. I really like podcasts because early in the morning when you start your day, you have to be really intentional about what you're listening to, so there are lots of mental health podcasts. Specifically, there's a Xavier grad. She is a psychologist in Atlanta. She has a podcast called Therapy for Black Girls. Not just for people who identify as women. They cover all topics. It's a really great one. Also, there's a second one that I love. There's a wellness expert, Debbie Brown is her name. The podcast is called Dropping Gems. And she's been on the Breakfast Club a few times. She's friends with Charlemagne, and she has helped him with his wellness journey. But she has a really good content there, and also on Instagram. One final one is a Black psychologist. She's at Columbia in New York. She's actually a Black Latina. Her name is Debbie Brown. I'm sorry, Dr. Marielle Bouquet. I said Debbie Brown already. Dr. Marielle Bouquet. But those are just some examples of how to make sure that you're feeding yourself good stuff regularly to maintain, if you feel like you're in a good place, maintaining, that good place.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's a great point. If you surround yourself with more positive things, it's amazing how your mindset changes. And that's something simple for everybody. If you know something, my grandmother cracks me up. She always talks about she can't watch things on the news because it's so depressing. And I'm like, well, at least you know what triggered you. So
that's right. Yeah, and it's a bit, we've got a lot of things going on right now in the world, lots of political tension, lots of things we see on the news. It is important to monitor how much exposure we have to the news. And I don't know about people in the class, but my grandparents used to watch the news on a loop. Like if you were in the house, you were hearing it like in the background. That stuff affects us, I think another thing, like we're just talking about paying attention to the feelings and what's triggering, is just paying attention to yourself, paying attention to other people, things like depression and anxiety. It can look, if there's a problem, it can look a little different for different people. So just recognizing when you're feeling a little off, and it's not necessarily always like with depression, it's not necessarily that you're always gonna eat more if there's a problem. It may be that you're eating less. It might be that, for some people they think, oh, if somebody's depressed, they're gonna sleep less. And maybe that you're actually sleeping more. It's just noticing when there are significant changes to what is typical for you. or, you know, the people you're around. You mentioned earlier connecting things that have happened to us to how we feel, how we behave now. You know, there's work to be done about that. Just recognizing what are the situations that we're in that make us feel good, and what are the situations that we're in that maybe make us feel off. And knowing that sometimes we're in an environment, you know, our relationships matter, um, the things we do. If there are things that are you're consistently in and it, you know, is detrimental to your mental health, there might be some things you can do to change your environment or the people you're around, you know. So
Absolutely. Well, I do have some questions from the students. I'll get to as many of these as I can.
okay.
And this first one is Jayla Graham. She's in ninth grade. And she asked, what type of people do you usually see as far as patients?
Yeah, good question, Jayla. Is Jayla?
Yep.
Jayla. Okay, hi Jayla. So I have seen a variety of patients, all different races, ages. The youngest patient I've worked with, or client, I should say, was 15 years old. And at the older end of the spectrum, I've seen patients as old as 85.
Wow.
And all people, regardless of where they are in life, age, background, oftentimes present with similar types of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the things that can be helpful with therapy is that most of the things we're going through might actually be considered normal reactions from human beings, you know? Even something as simple as moving to a new house or graduating from high school and going to college. You know, I've worked with clients where they were just having some challenges adjusting because change is hard, you know? So I would say that I've worked with just people from all different races and backgrounds. Depending on where I was working, the communities looked a little different. When I was in Louisiana working in New Orleans, I worked with predominantly African American clients. Once I started working in a remote setting, I noticed even more diversity because I was working with people from all over the state of Texas. Just all different backgrounds. So.
But that's the cool thing about counseling is that if you wanted to specialize in something, you could. I have a friend here and she specializes in schizophrenics. That's all she does. And she does it. But if you wanted to specialize in something, you could. And if you got sick of that, you can move to a brand new area.
Yeah, any area, any group, you know, some people specialize in only pediatrics and adolescents, for only young folks. Some people specialize in geriatrics, so people who are in the aging population. Yeah. Some people specialize in, like you said, certain types of issues. I myself had done a lot of work with people who struggle with personality disorders at a previous role. Really interesting stuff. In private practice, though, I've seen more general things, your mild to moderate depression and anxiety, you know, and generally maybe shorter term, you know, somebody might work with me for a few months and feel back to their normal selves and I don't see them again. Some people are engaged in therapy long-term their whole lives. And that's also good too, you know?
Yeah. And that's also means there's that many more job openings in the future, especially with the growing trend of substance abuse rehab. So there's always a need for people to look into this, and you can, you know, a lot of people they're employed at a place and they do some freelance stuff. So there's a lot of opportunities there.
Absolutely. When you talk about jobs, there's so many opportunities to work in the field. I know for myself, I have worked in community mental health. So working at like the community agencies, right, that do home visits and things like that. So I did that. I've also done private practice. So that's generally what you see on TV, right? A therapist is in their chair, there's a couch, you come into the office one-to-one. I've done that. Also in telehealth, you know, there's so many remote behavioral health companies now. That's different. There are hospitals. right? You can work in a hospital, a general hospital, or a psychiatric hospital, is also an option. There are therapists in schools, so school counselors. Some schools have more school counselors than others. Some schools, the school counselors can actually do counseling and therapy, and some mostly just do testing and things like that. But that's another area that counselors and therapists work in.
Here's a good one right here. This is Caitlin Perry. She's also in ninth grade. And she asked, does your work ever affect your personal life?
Hey, Caitlin, that's a really good question. Is one of the things the answer is yes. It can, especially when you are someone that just genuinely cares about people, you're empathetic, it's really natural to be genuinely concerned and think about people even when you get off work. One of the things that we learn in becoming mental health providers or just anybody in the helping profession is how to maintain your own mental health, how to prevent burnout, and how to sort of you can help someone with their issue without owning it yourself, without it becoming your personal issue. It's something also a boundary to think about with even our friends and families, things like that. So it is something that I myself personally, and I know other people in the profession, we have to actively do. We have to make sure that we are processing the things that we hear and talk to people about. And I think that's anybody in a human services field, right? You think about firefighters, you think about people who work in hospitals, nurses and doctors, anybody who's teachers even, anybody who's connecting with other human beings all the time, you can be affected, so you have to just actively be mindful and take care of yourself mentally.
Absolutely. Here's a good one. This is Taylor Harris. She's one of our basketball players here.
Okay.
She asked, what are some of the strengths that you use to help others through their hard times?
Hey, Taylor. Strengths that I use to help others. Definitely being a listener, right? And not listening to talk, but listening to really understand the other person and what it is that they need in the moment. Also, a personal just trait of myself, but I think anybody working with people, you have to be unbiased and non-judgmental. So not going into talking to someone with judgments about what you think they should do or what they could do or what you would do even, you have to sort of take your own personal self out of it and advocate for the person and be there to support them without judgment. So I would say those are the most important things. Aside from also, I mentioned earlier, the empathy, just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, and imagining what it would be like to experience what they're experiencing, is another thing that is helpful to me in the role.
Awesome. And that's a great segue to this question. This is Michael Sherrill, one of our football players here. And he asked, What is the most rewarding part of your job?
Hey, Michael, the most rewarding part absolutely is just when people say that they appreciated the support and just somebody to vent to listen to them, to walk through them with it. Also, seeing people get better, it can be really isolating to deal with problems on your own for anybody. And so the benefit of working as a mental health professional is that I get to be the person who's on the outside of their lives that they can talk to without judgment, keep the secrets, and I know that that's helpful to people. So that's really rewarding to me.
Absolutely. I just got two more from the students. This is Jaden Thompson, and he asked, what is the hardest part about dealing with people from so many different backgrounds?
Hey, Jaden, let's see. The hardest part, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't say it's hard. I will say that it's actually work, because when you are working with people from different backgrounds, you have to understand that you don't know, right? Like even somebody who looked just like me, let's say somebody else who's Black, like their Black experience might be different from mine. Even
Absolutely.
somebody else who identifies as a woman, it doesn't mean that we have the same walk or that I understand what they're going through. So I would say one of the word was hardest, but one of the most challenging things is just giving the space and time to learning what it's like for somebody else to be walking in their shoes. And just knowing that you have to listen and learn also about other cultures. You know, when you think about people who are maybe follow a different religion than you, or they come from a different place, you got to learn what that's like and what's important to them. You know, people from different cultures, there's different norms for their cultures, so you have to learn, spend time, learning and asking the right questions.
Yeah, and that's another big part about LSU. And you mentioned that, and you worked on campus there with us at the rec center, and we had people probably 8 or 9 different countries just working at one place. So that was the first time I'd ever been around anybody from Japan. That's the first time I'd ever been around anybody from Sweden, Australia, Nigeria, Pakistan, India. That's just off the top of my head. So around all those different cultures in a college setting, even if you don't want to be a counselor, is very useful because you get to see the world from other people's perspectives, which is just so important no matter what field you go into.
Yeah, it broadens your perspective on life. It's so interesting you brought that up. I don't know if anybody in the room has been to Slidell. It's not that far from where y'all are, but I know I didn't grow up seeing a lot of people from other cultures and backgrounds. I mean, it was pretty much just Black or white, not even Hispanic.
Same for us, yeah.
Hispanic, yeah. So going to a place where I would see that, it's so enriching, it just brings things to a new level for you, so it's college is a great opportunity, and even for people who don't choose a certain college, or a certain path, just having exposure outside of what you're used to is growth,
Absolutely. I just got one more from the students. This is Alexis Bailey, one of our cheerleaders here. And she asked, what is the biggest challenge you have faced in your career?
Hey, Alexis. Biggest challenge. Biggest challenge I would say has been, working in roles where you are in a helping profession. Like I said, not just therapists or counselors, teachers, doctors. You get into situations where you have to realize and understand that people's lives are their own. And you can't necessarily always, quote unquote, fix everything for everybody. And some take time. Change takes time for people, progress takes time. And so it can be challenging to see people go through difficult times for long periods of time. And that there's always hope. There's always hope for change. There's always hope for better. But it can be tough, to watch people go through tough times. So I would say that's the most difficult part of the job.
And I'm with you on that. Now we're almost out of time, and I just thank you so much for joining us. One of the most people I've ever been around. And it's such a joy that 18 years later we're getting to have this conversation. But before we go, just why is it so important for these kids to know, no matter what they're going through, that one, it's probably a lot more common than they realize, and two, that it is okay to seek help, because no mental health issue, big or small, has not been dealt with at some point.
That's right. You are right on. We all deserve to take care of ourselves, to be taken care of. I can say, even as a mental health counselor, I have my own counselor and therapist. It's so important, why not? And I think that, even if it's something that you might have not considered before, you know, give the opportunity, I think, to just learn more about it. I'm happy to, you know, share my email address, connect with anybody after if they have more questions and concerns. But just like we take care of our physical health, go to the doctor, we brush our teeth, we go to the dentist. Mental health is also a part of health, and we have to maintain it so that we can show up our best selves, you know, in life, at school, at work, with our, you know, in relationships and everything. It's just, you know, something that if we don't pay attention to, you know, we can get into a bad place sometimes. And even if you are in a bad place, I love that there's the new 988 line. You know, 988 can call anytime, text. There's a website. It's just so, you know, mental health services now is so widely available, I think, because we know that it's important and we know that people need it. Everybody, you know, and like I said, working in this field, one of the things that I see is we're all going through similar things, you know, and none of it is easy for anybody, you know. It might look like it on the outside, you know, especially we see social media, all we see is the good pictures. You know, we don't see always the rough times. So just giving yourself grace for when things are difficult, and reaching out, you know, if you need help and support when things are tough. And I think even just especially for this age group, we know that it's just, it can be a challenge, you know, to be in that age. But there is support. And outside, even if it's not in that community, you don't need it. The internet, it reaches everywhere. So I work with people who are hundreds of miles away from me. So, you know, like I said, there's the 988 line. You know, there's other support that you can access remotely. Even in the state of Mississippi, if you wanted to work with a therapist, even if they're not in that city, you can work with a therapist that's hours away just on video, just like we are right now.
Yep.
So I would say also can just consider all the options.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, we're up against the bell. So, but again, I just thank you so much. It's just unbelievable, the advice you've given and the positivity you just always have going. And I really appreciate it. We're going to have to do this again. Dr. Soon to be Dr. Ashley Larche-Willis, all the way from Dallas, Texas, LSU grad. Go Tigers.
Yes. Go Tigers.
National champions.
That's right.
All right.
Glad to see you.
I talk to you soon, my friend.
Good luck.